Imagine standing in a small Virginia town in 1781. The air is thick with smoke, the ground shakes with cannon fire, and thousands of soldiers are closing in. Trapped inside is the proud British Army, once thought unbeatable, now desperate, and running out of hope. What happened here would change the world forever. This isn't just another battle, it's the moment the American Revolution reached its breaking point. The story of Yorktown is a tale of courage, betrayal, and an impossible dream that became reality. And it all began when one general made a choice that turned a quiet riverside town into the cage where an empire would fall. By the summer of 1781, the American Revolution had dragged into its sixth brutal year. Farms lay in ruin, villages burned, and both sides were weary. But all eyes turned to Virginia, where British General Charles Cornwallis led his red-coated army. Confident in his position, he marched his men to the small port town of Yorktown, believing it was the safest place to regroup. Yorktown sat on a peninsula, bordered by the York River and Chesapeake Bay. Perfect, Cornwallis thought, because the Royal Navy could supply or rescue him if danger arose. With about 7,000 experienced soldiers, Cornwallis felt secure. He ordered trenches dug, cannon batteries built, and homes seized for shelter. The town quickly turned into a fortress. Yet he didn't realize that his choice of ground would soon trap him instead of protect him. Hundreds of miles away, George Washington was frustrated. For years he had dreamed of retaking New York City from the British, but the stronghold was too powerful. Then came a message that changed everything. The French fleet, under Admiral de Grasse, was sailing for the Chesapeake. If they could cut off Cornwallis by sea, Washington and his French ally General Rochambeau could strike on land. The idea was bold, and it might finally end the war. In August, Washington made his gamble. He secretly marched his army south, pretending, at first, to move toward New York. The deception worked. The British in New York didn't realize his true destination until it was too late. Across rivers, through mud, and under burning sun, thousands of French and American soldiers pushed toward Virginia. Hope grew with every step. Back in Yorktown, Cornwallis still believed reinforcements would come. But in early September, the waters of the Chesapeake thundered with cannon fire. The French fleet clashed with the British in the Battle of the Chesapeake, and when the smoke cleared, the French held the bay. The Royal Navy was gone. Cornwallis's escape route vanished in a single day. Now he was cornered, his back to the water, the Franco-American army marching ever closer. Yorktown, the refuge he had chosen, was turning into a cage. The final showdown of the war was about to begin. By late September 1781, Yorktown was surrounded by movement and noise. From the north and west, American and French troops poured into Virginia, marching with a determination that hadn't been seen since the war began. At their head rode George Washington and French General Rochambeau, united in command of an army nearly 17,000 strong, twice the size of Cornwallis's force. For years, the Americans had fought with fewer men, fewer supplies, and ragged uniforms. But now, with French soldiers marching beside them in spotless white coats and their artillery crews hauling heavy cannons, the tide felt different. Villagers and farmers along the roads cheered, handing out bread and water. For ordinary people, the sight of this massive Allied army was proof that independence might finally be within reach. Inside Yorktown, Cornwallis ordered his men to strengthen their defenses. Trenches were dug, cannon mounted, and earthworks raised. But the British commander knew the truth. Without the Navy, he was trapped. The French fleet now ruled the Chesapeake, sealing off any chance of rescue or supplies. On September 28th, Washington's army surrounded the town in a wide arc. Smoke from thousands of campfires darkened the sky, while drums and bugles echoed across the fields. At night, under cover of darkness, American and French soldiers began digging long, zigzagging trenches, inching closer to the British lines. The work was brutal, shovels scraping, dirt flying, whispered orders in the dark. But each morning the defenders awoke to find the enemy closer. By October 6th, the first siege line was finished, and heavy artillery rolled into position. Washington, studying maps by candlelight, finally saw the moment he had been waiting for. The British stronghold that had once seemed secure was now slowly being strangled. Cornwallis, cut off and outnumbered, waited inside Yorktown. The noose was tightening, and the sound of distant digging told him the storm was about to break. On the evening of October 9, 1781, the silence around Yorktown was shattered. With a signal from Washington, Allied cannons roared to life. The thunder rolled across the river and shook the ground beneath the town. For the British soldiers huddled behind their defenses, it felt as if the sky itself was falling. The bombardment was relentless. French and American gunners, working side by side, fired day and night. Cannonballs smashed into British earthworks, tore through homes, and set buildings ablaze. Even Cornwallis's headquarters was struck, forcing him to move underground. Soldiers and civilians alike took shelter in cellars, listening to walls tremble with each blast. Still, the British resisted. Sharpshooters picked off workers in the siege trenches. Skirmishes flared at night with sudden bursts of musket fire breaking the darkness. But the Allied trenches kept creeping forward, zigzagging closer until their guns nearly looked into the British camp. Washington himself visited the lines, encouraging exhausted men who dug through mud with blistered hands. Then came one of the most dramatic moments of the siege. On the night of October 14th, Washington ordered a direct assault on two key British redoubts, small but vital forts guarding the outer defenses. The French stormed one, while American troops under Alexander Hamilton charged the other. Bayonets fixed, the soldiers rushed forward in silence until they were nearly upon the walls. Then a cry rang out, and the attack exploded in chaos. Muskets fired, men climbed the parapets, and hand-to-hand combat erupted in the dark. Within minutes, both redoubts fell. The Allied lines closed in even tighter, their artillery now positioned to rain fire directly into the heart of Yorktown. Cornwallis's men were trapped under a storm of iron and lead. The once proud British army now sheltered in ditches and half-ruined houses, their numbers dwindling with each hour. By mid-October, it was clear the British could not hold out much longer. Supplies were nearly gone, casualties were mounting, and the Allies showed no sign of letting up. The siege had become unbearable, and the walls of Yorktown were crumbling under fire. The end was approaching, and Cornwallis knew it. As the cannons pounded Yorktown, Cornwallis looked desperately to the sea. Reinforcements were promised, messages had been sent. Surely the Royal Navy, the pride of Britain, would not abandon him. But the Chesapeake remained under French control, and each day passed without the sight of British sails. To the trapped redcoats it felt like betrayal. In London, leaders had underestimated the urgency. Miscommunication and hesitation plagued the British command. General Clinton, based in New York, received Cornwallis's pleas but delayed action, unsure if Washington's southern march was a feint. By the time Clinton finally prepared relief forces, weeks had already slipped away. The Empire's finest, generals were failing to coordinate, leaving Cornwallis stranded with dwindling supplies. Inside Yorktown, morale crumbled. Soldiers were exhausted, food was scarce, and water was fouled. Disease spread through the crowded town. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, begged for safety as shells rained down day and night. Meanwhile, Cornwallis made a desperate choice. He attempted to evacuate part of his army across the York River under cover of darkness. If he could escape north, he might regroup. But fate intervened. A sudden storm swept in, scattering boats and smashing them against the shore. The attempt collapsed, and his men returned wet, shaken, and hopeless. All the while, Washington and Rochambeau tightened their grip. The Allies had coordinated with precision, each move reinforcing the other. The contrast was stark. Where the Franco-American command worked in unity, the British leadership faltered. Cornwallis was isolated, cut off not only by land and sea but by indecision from his own superiors. For the soldiers, it was more than poor strategy. It felt like betrayal from the very empire they had sworn to serve. They were trapped in crumbling trenches under endless fire, while relief that never came was promised again and again. The once proud redcoats whispered in anger and despair. By mid-October, Cornwallis had no illusions left. The British command had failed him. The Navy was nowhere in sight. His army was reduced and starving, and every attempt to break free had ended in disaster. Surrounded and abandoned, Cornwallis began to face the bitter truth. Yorktown would not be his victory. It would be his surrender. On the morning of October 17, 1781, Yorktown fell eerily quiet. After weeks of thunderous bombardment, no cannon fire echoed across the fields. Instead, a lone drummer boy appeared on the British lines, beating a steady rhythm of surrender. Behind him, an officer waved a white handkerchief high in the air. Cornwallis had finally accepted the inevitable. The British army could fight no more. Washington received the message in his headquarters, a small tent lit by dim morning light. He remained composed, but inside, he knew this was the moment he had spent years chasing. The British, once considered invincible, were asking for terms. Negotiations followed quickly, and on October 19th, the surrender ceremony was set. That afternoon, British soldiers marched out of Yorktown in silence, their once proud red coats dulled with dust and ash. Their drums beat a slow tune of defeat as they laid down their arms. American and French troops lined the roads, watching in solemn silence. Cornwallis himself claimed illness and refused to attend, sending his second-in-command instead. But the humiliation was complete. Britain's finest army in America was beaten. For Washington, it was vindication. Years of defeats, retreats, and desperate winters had led to this moment. He stood tall as the British surrendered, not with triumph in his eyes, but with the quiet dignity of a man who understood the weight of history. The war was not officially over. The Treaty of Paris would not be signed until 1783. But Yorktown had broken Britain's will to continue. The fight for independence was won. Across the colonies, bells rang, crowds cheered, and prayers of thanksgiving filled churches. For farmers, merchants, and families who had endured years of hardship, the news brought tears of relief. For enslaved people who had fled to British lines in search of freedom, the outcome was more complicated, yet even they understood the world was shifting. America would never be the same. Yorktown's legacy stretched far beyond the battlefield. It was proof that unity, between Americans and their French allies, between ordinary citizens and weary soldiers, could topple even the mightiest empire. The revolution had begun as an impossible dream, but in the fields of Virginia, it became reality. When the last British ship sailed away, the world knew a new nation had been born, and its story was only just beginning. Yorktown was more than a battle. It was the turning point where ordinary farmers, shopkeepers, and soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with seasoned French allies and brought an empire to its knees. From the thunder of cannons to the quiet beat of a surrender drum, every moment echoed with the promise of freedom. The revolution did not end in a single day, but after Yorktown, the outcome was no longer in doubt. America had proven it could not only resist, but win. And as the British marched away in defeat, the world witnessed the birth of a new nation, one forged in sacrifice, unity, and unshakable resolve. The story of Yorktown reminds us that even against impossible odds, history can be rewritten by those who dare to fight for it.